Yeah, so welcome to Brand Lab. It's something that, as I say, is intended really to give help and support to people that are going through different sort of branding challenges. Really, I've worked in branding for a long time, and it's the sort of thing that I really sort of love and enjoy. And I sort of have this philosophy, having come from a background of quite corporate and brand identity based work, that branding can seem quite complicated. And I think I'm on this sort of mission to sort of demystify that and untangle it for people. And this is why Brand Lab was created, so that I could sort of pick different topics, different areas that will help people on any part of their branding journey. So this sort of mission to demystify things, because I generally believe that business owners have the answers, and I can help get that out of them. So I'm going to start with a little thing before we get on to introduce you to Deborah in more detail. Is this? I mean, in the States, are you that bothered about the Olympics? Do you get excited about the Olympics?
Some people do.
Some people do. I think
I'm
it's
ex- I'm ex- I'm excited that Flavor Flav is a ambassador for the women's water polo. I think that's pretty
Yeah, it is
exciting.
pretty exact. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
it's really
read
cool.
about that, and also Snoop Dogg is hanging out at all the events possible, along with the other people that are there. So, just sort of here we go, the sort of Olympic logos from the past. And I don't know whether Britain gets a bit obsessed with the branding of Olympics and things like that, but we did this identity in 2012 that caused a lot of controversy, and yeah, a lot of people didn't like it. Personally, I really liked it because I thought it was bold and courageous. I do like this Los Angeles one from I think that's 84, 86 or
Four.
something, 84. And it just has a bit of sort of style to it, which I kind of liked. And I just wondered what people thought of the Paris logo. What do you think about this? Any thoughts on that?
I saw somebody post a picture of this next to Mary J. Blige and say that Paris's logo looks like Mary J. Blige. I think it's very French.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's it. I mean, I think for me, it's one of those sort of things is that I think it answers a really good question, because it doesn't really capture anything of the spirit of being an Olympic athlete or anything like that. And I think when I was reflecting on this, I think that's kind of right, because for the Olympics, I don't think you can create a brand for the Olympics when you're up against what the Olympics is, in terms of the pain and anguish that athletes are going through to do their best ever performances. And I think when we always talk about branding, branding, is a logo is not a brand. I think this is a good example of this. This is a logo. This is logo-tastic. It's the classic, flame and the lips and the hair and stuff like that, and it's got the kind of clever ideas in there, but it's not a brand. But I think why it works quite well for me is that it actually allows it just to exist as a symbol of what this year's Olympics are, and I think being very French as well. And actually, the brand itself is all the athletes kind of doing everything. So that's what I thought about the Paris Olympics, and I'm happy that it's just a logo. Anyone got any thoughts on that?
The font reminds me of how, I don't know, I think 1920s Paris when I look at the font. So it's an
Oh,
interesting choice that they had for that.
Oh, without doubt, they've built into the design of the font the classic bits, probably more from like the way that they have the metro and the typefaces,
Mm.
that they use that sort of Art Deco thing, which is super cool. So that was just a little bit about branding that's going on in the world at the moment. That we're doing okay. Great Britain, obviously America are ahead of us, but that's because you've got more people. Right. So moving on to the reason that we're here today is to talk about crafting your book. So I'm going to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Deborah Ager, that I've known now for about 4 years, who's a book writing and content coach, and really has sort of helped many people get their business book, their non-fiction book. I think it was over 45 people and leaders that have actually gone through the process. And it's something that even I'm very interested in, and sort of kind of think, well, yeah, I think I'd like to write a business book. So Deborah's going to I'm just going to sort of change screens, because Deborah's going to kind of work us through some tips, some practical things. And I think we'll have time to do this before you need to go as well. So that's really good. And
Yeah.
so let me just put Deborah in charge, make the host. And then hopefully, because we were trying it before, it'll work really smoothly into sharing the screen. And then obviously once we've gone through this, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. Okay.
Let's see here. Is that this one? All right. Can you guys see my screen all right?
Perfect.
All right. So I just moved the screen. So were you able to see it move?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, good. Just making sure because sometimes it doesn't. All right. So basically you're in the right place if you want to have, if any of this is something that you want to have, more impact and influence. And especially if you're asking that question a lot of people ask, which is, does the world need another book about? And then insert your topic. Or if you've dreamed of publishing a book. I love what this client of mine said about writing a book. He said, or about books in general, he said it's a form of communication to engage a relationship and move to the next step. And to me, I feel like that is the case, especially for prescriptive nonfiction or books that are about someone's area of expertise. Yet I was also thinking that it also applies to novels and other kinds of books because we want people to be transformed in some way from reading our book. And we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of transformation in just a little bit. So everything that I'm sharing today has been proven and is based on my work on 45 plus books and counting in my writing and editing career. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about me, but these results are based on clients and myself. And these strategies worked really well to help my clients initiate and start their books. So my tip is while watching and listening, write down what you can take action on in the next 7 days. Also, because I know lives are busy, I've built in some time for us to just be able to take the actions now so you can get started now and then walk away from this session with actual steps taken. So this is just the general overview of what we'll do. We'll talk about book types, what they are, how you can choose one, how to start mapping out the ideas, the 3 main story structures, and also how to tell your story with some ideas about how to get started on that. And just a little bit about me, my past is as a marketer at the Red Cross, but I also have an MFA in creative writing. So now I blend my marketing experience working for large organizations with my the fact that I edited a poetry magazine and founded one for 10 years. And now I merge those skills together to help people create books. I've also published my own books on small presses and on large publishers. So I kind of have experience with a variety of kinds of publishers as well. So the 12-hour days at the Red Cross weren't so hot for me, and I wanted to see my dad because he was on the decline. And so I started my own business as a marketing consultant. By then, a lot of my Red Cross coworkers had left and gone on to other pastures. So they were hiring me in to work for their organization. So that was amazing, an amazing way to start a consulting company. And then over time, I got in touch with someone who was an advertising agency owner. We reconnected after many years, and he asked me to write his book because he knew I had the digital marketing experience. He also knew that I could write. So he's like, maybe you can help me write my book on content marketing for scientific companies. And I really liked that work, and that made me change the whole focus of my business. So I liked it so much. And as I was saying before, my marketing business and leadership coaching experience have given me an advantage, kind of a unique edge among other book editors. I worked as a copywriter to put myself through grad school, and then also managed a magazine and edited writing for that. So usually people will reach out to me and say, like, I like it that you're a poet, which surprised me coming from someone who works in sales. I didn't expect that, but you never know. So those are some of the things that just set me apart from other people. This is my process, the book creation stages, and Nigel helped me name some of these because he's very good at naming, but they're clarify, storify, and amplify. And we're going to focus mostly on the clarify stage today with some actionable steps that you can take right now to be able to walk away with some progress made. And the clarify stage basically focuses on clarifying the big idea and the through line of your book, the main message, we might call it, identifying your readership on a deep level. So if you guys have done persona work for your business or, for a company, it's a little bit like persona work. Then finalizing the topics and then starting to build the book map. And then Storify is about refining the structure, building out that content, writing the book, And then amplify focuses on the revision stage of writing and then getting that book out there into the hands of other people. So clarify, storify, and amplify. So we'll come back to that. And so what I'd love for you to do now is just think through looking at these lists. These are sort of the subtasks under each section. They're not exhaustive. They're not an exhaustive list for each section. There's more that gets done, but these are the basic ones. And just kind of identify where you are now in the process. And then just let us know in the comments, like, are you in clarify? Are you in storify? Are you in amplify? And although this presentation is geared more for people who are just getting started, the material still applies even if you have quite a bit done, because these foundational aspects are important for crafting the content that will help create the transformation that helps create readers who really love the work that you've written. So just take a moment to jot that down. If you want to share in the comments, please feel free to do that. A real quick story about a client of mine named Ellen Burton. She wrote the Civility Project, and she wrote me afterward and said, my book brought in 4 clients in 2 months, and these are fairly large corporate contracts. And the really cool thing that I like to note about this story for people is that those corporate contracts didn't just buy one book, but they bought multiple books. And then they also had her come in and lead workshops. So if you can sell 30 books at once or 20 books at once, that's wonderful. In her case, just with one client, they said, can you come and speak to this one group? And then later they came back to her and said, can you come speak to a second group? So now they're buying another chunk of books from her. So thinking about how ways you might be able to incorporate that into your life, your business, your future, as ways of selling more than just one copy of a book at a time can be very beneficial to getting your message out there. All right, so what is it that happens in the clarify stage? Well, the clarify stage, we're focusing on that through line that I mentioned and those different elements that help us create the strong foundation, which can include the topics, who the audience is, the questions that they're asking, and so on. So you can see why the first step to writing a book might not involve all the writing that we think it does. A lot of people think writing a book starts with, like, you start with page 1 and then work your way through, but the clarify stage focuses on those foundational elements that are necessary so that when we write, we're writing efficiently, we're not wasting time, we're not writing ourselves in circles, as has happened to people who've come to me and been like, I just need help, or I wrote 50,000 words and like, it's not a book, you know? So when that happens, they haven't had this structure. They haven't gone through this kind of structure because they didn't know about it. So we're gonna go through some of these steps. So when I'm working with clients, we use this reader persona worksheet to dive really deep into who the ideal reader is and to really get inside their mind so we can craft the content that they need in order to make that transformation, in order to learn, feel inspired, and so on. So, and we focus on what I call an audience-first approach in this whole process. And basically what that means is that we write in service to the reader for the most part. There's kind of like the stories that we want to tell, the things that we want to say. That's part of it. And then we also have to marry that and align it with what it is that they need to know about us and what it is that they need to know about our topic. And then the result of that is personable writing that deeply connects with other people. It's meaningful writing, not just writing, you know, it's not fluff, it's not boring to them, because we've really put the thought in about what this reader needs to know. And all of that is going to help create that transformation that I mentioned earlier. So one example of transformation would be this book, Farming Assets, by a client of mine. He helps people create secure financial futures and pay less taxes, but legally, and figure that part out. So what this is helping people do is figure out how, you know, the steps that they can take now and what it is that they need to take into consideration in order to experience that transformation of becoming more knowledgeable about how to keep more of their money. So that's just one kind of transformation. That might not seem like the most inspirational one to some people, but everyone's writing a different book. And I'm giving lots of examples from different kinds of books so that no one feels like, oh, that book doesn't apply to me, so it won't work. But there's lots of different examples of how this works for different kinds of books. So in case anyone's familiar with design thinking or has used it before, I just wanted to point out that this process, as I was developing it, I realized, you know what, clarify, storify, amplify kind of follows along with the design thinking process. We empathize with the audience at the start, then we ideate topics and content, then we're defining that content more specifically, and then the prototype could be the outline, it could be the draft, and then we're testing it, because once we write the draft, We're going to go back and look at it with an editor. We might share it with trusted partners to get people's input and feedback, and that's kind of the testing stage. So I just wanted to point that out because I thought this is really neat how it aligns with this existing design process that's already out there. So with empathy in mind, we use this idea of the empathy map created by someone else, not me, but to empathize with your audience by answering these 4 questions. So I encourage you to jot down some ideas related to these questions, and I'll just go through them and the kinds of the ways and reasons that they're formative and useful for developing your content. So what do people ask about your topic? Now, if you're an expert in your topic, which you probably are, people are always asking you similar questions. So for instance, in my case, a lot of people will say, does the world really need another book like mine? Or they'll say, how can I find the time to write the book? Or they'll ask me, how do I start writing the book? So if I was writing a book on how to write a book, I would want to make sure I had those questions addressed in my content. And then what do people think about it? So for instance, if they're a leadership coach writing a book, for example, might have people thinking that being a manager is hard or impossible. Well, that's really useful to know because you need to know how they're thinking about the topic so that you can address that in your content. And then along those same lines, what are people hearing from other people about that topic? For instance, if someone's writing a book on running a marathon or climbing a mountain, people might say, oh, it's too hard, don't do it at this time of year, that time of year, just don't do it at all. There might be like a lot of negative talk around it. And if there is a topic that you're writing about where there's people saying negative things to the people who want to do it, that's also good to know about because it should be addressed in the content and even maybe in the title of the book itself so that people still will go forward and make that transformation for themselves. And then how do people feel about it? So in the case of, say, a personal finance book that helps people create a secure financial future, people might be feeling nervous or they might be feeling uncertain or feel like they should know this already. And in the case of writing, some of that applies. A lot of people feel self-doubt. They might feel like, oh, I should have learned how to write better in high school. And my high school teacher was, just filled up the pages with red pen and wasn't very nice, and all that kind of thing. So, so knowing how they think about it also helps you know the kind of content. So just jot down some of the answers to these questions, and that's going to help inform some of these later stages. And you can always go back to this and do it in more depth when you have more time. So following up or adding more to this idea of the empathy map is we kind of covered this first one of what do they ask, but we also want to focus on what the worries are. So I mentioned earlier, if I was writing a book about how to write a book, I would want to address one of the common worries, which is what will my colleagues think of my writing? That worries a lot of people. Well, one of the things I could let them know is that when they work with a good editor, the editor will help them with the writing. So they don't need to worry about that. All they need to do is write privately. They don't need to show it initially to anybody. Just get the ideas out. And then an editor can help them make it better and strengthen that writing. And every writer needs an editor. So it's, there's nothing wrong with that process. That would be another point that I would include in such a book. And then what knowledge is it that they need in order to move forward? Sometimes we're such experts on what we do that we forget the basics, so we kind of have to go back to our beginner's mind a little bit and think through what is it that they need to know. Again, that's putting ourselves in their shoes, which is empathy, right? So figuring that out is also necessary. So just writing the answers to these questions, if you notice, it's already starting to give you topic ideas, kind of in this like sneaky side way, where it's not like directly asking you like, hey, what are your topics, where it can sometimes feel stressful, but instead it's asking these questions to draw out ideas from you that come from your audience. And then what stopped them in the past? So the big ones for writing a book, for instance, are time and not knowing what to do. So helping people know those steps, helping people figure out how to make time, those things would be really important in a book about how to write a book. And then what complaints do they have? Now, they might not tell you the complaints directly, but where you can find a version of complaints would be in reviews of similar books. And looking at similar books on the topic can be really useful to you because you can see, oh, okay, this is a really good book, but what is it that they didn't address that I could address in my book? So for example, when I did this research for someone on a personal finance book, there was one review of a similar book that said they didn't give enough visuals. So that might be an opportunity for an author. Okay, I'm going to give more visuals in my book and make it really clear how they take steps 1, 2, and 3, something like that. And then we're going to clarify the big idea. So I've created this book incubator journal that I use with clients, and we go deep into this where we're clarifying the big idea and we're drawing out some of the elements of the content, so it can be incorporated into the outline. And part of that is defining your book type. So I'm going to go through some of the book types and give you ideas so you can jot down what you think yours is. But just talking very briefly about this book, Economic Termites, it was an unusual structure and perhaps one that won't be repeated by anyone else. I don't know. But part of it is how-to, and the other part takes the how-to information and puts it into a story format. So there's 2 sections of this book, the how-to and the story format. Some people only want the how-to because they feel like stories are fluff. Some people want the story because they think the how-to is too boring. And then some people want both because they really want to learn the material at a deep level. So that way this book can address those 3 different kinds of audiences that the author had identified. And it's really a unique structure. Like I said, probably won't apply to most people, but the reason why I mention it is it just shows the kind of creative approach you can take once you deeply understand your audience and the way they consume information. So here's a couple examples for you to choose from. One time I mentioned one of these to someone and they're like, no, I'd never want to write a book like that. They didn't want to write a reference book. And I said, it doesn't mean you have to. It's just one of the many options that's out there. So if these don't sit with you or they don't feel right, that's fine. They're just here to kind of stir up some ideas and get some thinking going. And then you can always, later on reflect upon what might feel right for you, what might feel right for your voice, your business, your personality, and also for your audience, of course. So a storytelling nonfiction book is highly popular and the kind that I see a lot. It's sort of like a dash of prescriptive nonfiction, which is like how to, but then the story is tied into it. And then a reference book, I worked on one of those for a sales organization, a sales training organization, and they wanted to take their podcast and turn it into a book somehow. And we decided, you've just interviewed like the major experts in the sales world. What if we create this reference book and we divide it up by topic? And then the sales people who don't tend to have a lot of extra time to read books from cover to cover, they can go in, like they can just dip into the book and get the part they need. So that's what we did for that particular book. So it worked really well, again, for that particular audience, but a different audience would probably not like that book. Or, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, we don't know. But for the sales audience, it worked very well. You can also do wisdom based on research or experience in your field. That's another popular one. And then also personal essays. So maybe, for people who have a collection of essays, I even had a leadership coach and workshop expert who incorporated poetry because she would use these books in her workshops with people. Oops, let me go back here. And then what we do is we start to put this material that we've gathered so far into a mind map. So, and then just last step is just jot down what one might seem right to you. Or if another idea popped up, jot that down. So you can use that going forward and consider it. So then in the mind map, what we can do here is in the center of the mind map, we just, you can write down your main topic. You can do this on paper for now or on your iPad, whatever tool feels most comfortable. This can also be moved into software at a later point if that feels more comfortable. It can be easier to move the ideas around. But this gives you a nonlinear way to get the ideas out of your head. So you start out with your main topic in the center, and then your subtopics would be sort of the next layer of bubbles. And those can be some of these questions that the answers to some of these questions that have just been asked while making the empathy map and while looking more deeply into who your audience is. So you can kind of see now how this starts to integrate together. And one step of this clarify process leads into the next step to help you identify the content. And then from that, we build out the structure of your outline or your book map. And then we know like what are the chapters going to be, what are the subsections of the chapters. And the benefit of doing this is that you know exactly what to write. So that takes care of one of the other issues a lot of people have. What do I write about? How do I start? once people have their book map figured out, they know how to start because they know the content. They know what they need to write about next. With a detailed outline, you know exactly what to put into your book. And that way you never have to sit down and face the blank page and not know what to do. So that can feel really good for a lot of people to have that plan going forward. The other advantage is that your voice starts to come through in the writing as you're answering these questions from the empathy map and elsewhere. And as you're working through your mind map, you are bringing your voice out. Turns of phrases that you use are being jotted down. It just happens naturally for the most part. And your personality is starting to bring the content to life. So as you begin to write it, your voice will start to come through the content as well. And a great example of that is this client of mine who wrote this book, Good Awkward. And she really loved how the book stayed in her voice. And she specifically said, I didn't want to write a book the way a professor would, but she's jokesy, she's playful, and she really wanted to keep the book in a voice that felt true to her. So again, the book creation stages are clarify, storify, and amplify. And that's the overall process for that. So you've already taken a few steps in the clarify stage to be able to figure out what the topics are for your book. And then now you know the stages. Even if you couldn't finish it all today, you can take this later and go through these stages to start figuring out and creating your outline. So just briefly, what happens in the story stage, before I talk about this, I wanted to share this interesting study with you guys, which is called Significant Objects. And what they did was they bought items from eBay that were inexpensive, and they bought items from the thrift store or charity shop, and they put them on eBay, and they hired writers to write stories. So think of like a wooden spoon that you normally would think would be 50 cents. You know, someone writes a great story around it, how it belonged to their grandmother, and they just, you know, this whole story is created, or nesting dolls, or whatever it is, just some little thing. And they put these items up on eBay with these stories. And what they wanted to do was to be able to measure how much of an increase they got between how much they paid for it and how much people were willing to pay on eBay. And as you can see from this highlighted section, the net profit was $3.6 million. This is a number I didn't even believe, so I had to do some Googling and look it up because it was such a high number. But what the number does, besides making the researchers very happy, I suppose, is that it shows us the power of stories and just how important they are for connecting with people to have them move forward and take an action. The action doesn't have to be buying something. It could be transforming. It could be, you know, something, it could be, you know, related to inspiration or related to changing their lives in some way. This client of mine, Michelle, wrote a book on personal finance that was based on the story of her husband passing away, leaving her with twins. And she had her financial story sort of already situated, but she knew a lot of people in her position might not have that. And so she wanted to write this book to help those women in particular to be able to create secure financial futures. And it also follows along with her personal story of how she handled being a single mom for a while. And then when she fell in love with her second husband, and then they had a blended family. So it kind of follows along a lot of those different life stages that many of us that some of us experience, and then some of them that many of us do go through. Not all of us experience every single thing she did, obviously, but it followed along with the story. So it was well received. And the nice thing about it is it made this somewhat dry topic of like wills and trusts and planning for your future. It made that somewhat dry topic more interesting to people, and it created an emotional connection. And some people would come up to her, you know, with tears in their eyes because it meant so much to them. And that was all because of the storytelling. So I want to point this out. Stories have shapes, and I just wanted to share in closing the overall shape of stories with you. So this comes from Kurt Vonnegut, the novelist. He found out that stories have shapes. He gave them names, and the one that I see used a lot and think is really useful for these kinds of books is person in whole, where someone starts out, they're kind of like, okay, you can see they're above the black line, like good fortune is up here, bad fortune is down here. This is like the midpoint of the two. So they start out, they're in good fortune, but you can see at the end, they're going to be better, which is funny because it's also what happens in your book as well. But they start here, and then things kind of get worse. So this kind of story can be told about your personal experience, or it can be told about a client you helped. Like maybe they started with something, then things got worse, then you came along as the guide and were able to help them, and then they ended up better than where they started. So this works for any kind of work someone's in, whether it's, leadership or executive coaching or change management or digital transformation, whatever it is, branding, marketing. It just has so many different applications to the types of stories that can be written in this way in order to support a statement that you're making in your book, or to help add interest to your book's content. And so just jotting down some things about your story, jotting down some bullet points about your story can be excellent here, and an excellent way of getting started. And the three main types of stories that are necessary in books would be, well, there's one that isn't, but two are. One is case study stories that show that your process or methods work and that you have the experience to help people. And then the other kind that is not always necessary is your personal story. So that doesn't need to be in every kind of book, but sometimes it's very useful to have it there. And then the third kind would be other people's stories, which would be stories that would support, maybe you're making a claim, or you want to share a story of a CEO, and maybe you didn't personally work with the CEO, but the story is very germane to what you're talking about. So those are some examples of different kinds of stories that can be used. And the cool thing is when you write a book, you become a hub around the topic, and people start to seek you out because they see that you're talking about it, they see that you've written about it, that you've thought deeply on the particular topic, and then it increases, speaking engagements, podcast appearances, and whatnot. It's really lovely to have that book for that purpose. These are just examples of when my book came out, and I never would have spoken at these places if not for having a book, because the book tied in with the reason for me being there. So the book can kind of give you a way to, get out there and be seen in a different way. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Whether you are attending live or you watch the replay, feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer questions. And there's also this free Dream Book Launcher as well. If you want to see where you are in the process and get some personalized steps moving forward, I developed this free tool so that you can do that. So, and thank you, Nigel, for having me. So do either of you guys have any questions?
Fantastic. Thanks, Deb. No, it's really, really good to see it all. And obviously those links will be shared in the replay notes, so you'll get the email address and the links to that. So again, actually, are there any questions? May as well sort of see, because there's a lot to, apart from the fact there's a lot to take in. I might ask Jefferson a question as well. Where do you think you are in your book writing process? I'll be straight up and say I'm well at the very start, the clarify, sort of sketched out an idea. How far ahead are you from that, do you think?
I'm also, first of all, Deborah, this is wonderful. Thank you for doing this. I'm definitely in the clarifying part of it. I've been dabbling with this for many years. I'm just to shed some light, I'm a professional musician, and I have 19 different jobs, and one of them has been basically the idea for the book is everything I learned about management, I learned from being a wedding singer.
Right.
Because I've been leading events for musicians and performing for well over a decade, and I've collected many, many crazy stories and anecdotes, and I've actually written a manual in how to lead bands on corporate and high pressure events, and I've been doing presentations all up and down the West Coast for the past 5 or 6 years. So I'm trying to flesh this out into a full book with all my memoirs and anecdotes and stories and instruction along the way and tips.
Oh, that's fantastic. I helped someone write a book on the business of music, but what he does is different from you. But it's sort of interesting to meet someone else who's sort of in the same realm. That's really cool.
Yeah,
I've already decided that the book's going to open up with the story about how I was physically assaulted by a father of the bride in the middle of an event. So
I want to read your book already. It does
I know.
But I think that's what's really intriguing, isn't it? Because I guess you might, if you just said, I'm going to tell you everything I learned about management. Yeah, kind of like say what? But I'm going to say everything I learned about management from being a wedding singer. Now I'm hooked and intrigued. And if chapter 1 is about when you get assaulted by the father of the bride, I'm reading chapter 1 at least, and then I'll be on to chapter 2. So I think that's really cool. So I think I'm similar to you though, Jefferson, is that I've had this idea for a while, but it's actually getting it, and maybe this is where Deb can help us. How do we get from that next step? Mine's about branding, but all through my love of music and records. And I've had this idea, for a couple of years now. So for me and Jefferson, what would be your one tip to get it sort of off the sketch and from the title to start writing our books? What would you suggest for us both?
You're asking me?
I'm asking Deborah if she's got tips for us to get
Oh, I
us
thought you were
to get.
asking him. I was like,
No,
okay.
no, I want
Yeah,
you to get. How are you going to get us?
Yeah.
How are you going to get us active on this? Because the
Yes.
Jefferson's book definitely needs to be written. Mine probably needs
Yes,
to be
yes.
written.
So what, I hope both your books are written. So, because I want to read them both. But one of the things I think is important to take into consideration is that this is a big project. And I'm working on a big project of my own too, a big book. And I realize this for myself. I'm like, it's such a big project, and we sometimes don't let ourselves have the sense of completion until it's all the way done. So what I need to do for myself, and what I encourage my clients to do, is to find ways that you can have wins throughout the process and then celebrate those wins and milestones. So for instance, Anthony Trollope, the novelist, would write in 15-minute chunks. And writing, I don't think, was the only thing that he did. But he would write in these 15-minute chunks until it added up to 3 hours. Now, we might not like 15-minute chunks or think it doesn't work. I'm not sure it really works for me. It seems too, too choppy for me. But maybe 30-minute chunks would work for me. And then by then, maybe I'm feeling good at 30 minutes and I just keep going to an hour, right? I mean, that certainly would not be a loss. So the point is finding, like, what are these wins? So Trollope would use these 15-minute chunks and then just feel a sense of completion that in 15 minutes they wrote X number of pages. They were trying, he tried to write a certain number of pages in every chunk of time. So that helped him make continual progress on his books and worked pretty well for him. Now, if that, that is not the end all be all answer for everybody, because that won't work for everybody. So it's more about experimenting. Try the 15-minute chunks, and if you hate it, just come up with something else, try something different. And then a second idea I have for both of you that has worked really well for a lot of my clients is to write a memo to yourself, or it could be to a trusted person who never, ever has anything bad to say about any of your ideas. Like, don't write the letter to someone who's like, oh, don't write a book, like not that person, but someone that is like really supportive, or to yourself. And just write a memo about your book and what you want to do with it. Why do you want to write it? What do you want people to gain from it? And just write about your book, because that takes the pressure off and you're not really writing your book, but it's helping you to crystallize these ideas, and it's helping you to gain confidence in just writing in the first place. And it kind of can quiet down those mind monkeys that like to tell us we shouldn't be writing a book.
It's like pitching to yourself what the book is.
Yeah. I love that. I love that phrasing for it. It's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. Great tips. So thanks for that again, Deborah. It's really good to see you. And Jefferson, if you've got any more questions, shout, or reach out to Deb, reach out to me. I can't answer the questions. I'm probably in exactly the same state as you. So thanks again, Deb. That was really helpful.
I have only one question for you, Nigel. And are those records chronological, or are they alphabetical, or?
They're alphabetical within genres. So the albums are within core genres of rock and indie, electronic dance, pop, and then the singles are more then subdivided into kind of 80s pop, 90s pop, new wave, noughties indie, rock, post-punk, new wave. So there's a few more.
You can write a book on how to stack your records.
I could write a book on how to stack records, and I would be very interested in it, and I will send you a copy if I do that. So thanks again, Deborah. I'm just going to finish with a couple of things, and this is obviously, also because hopefully, if you're watching the replay, I think you'll find this interesting. But I just want to just sort of share a bit, back to design, which I'm all about, and branding. And I think it's really interesting because I got involved in a book project. It's just actually about 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And a friend of mine approached me to write a book. And I guess the thing is, and you sort of always have this thing about, never judge a book by the cover. There's this song by ABC, if you judge a book by the cover, then you judge the look by the lover. But I think without doubt, book covers are really, really important. And actually, when Deb was showing me some of the covers then, I was sort of pricking up my eye. I mean, they were all well designed, but some of them grabbed my attention more than others. And clearly a title is a really important part of that as well. I'm sure Deb might have thoughts on that, but even just the fact that, Jefferson, you were talking about wedding singers, it just made me sort of smile. So my friend Jill, she had this great idea for a book. It was all about, how as a businesswoman, business leader, she'd hit a glass ceiling and she couldn't get any further in her career. And basically, it got her frustrated. So I guess in Deb's storytelling world, the trouble happened. Her career was going well. She then hit this glass ceiling, and then she wrote a book about it. It was called Why Men Win at Work, and it was a really good subject. And she'd sort of finished the manuscript and sent it off to the publishers. And they came back with this. This was the book cover that they came back with, and she was just kind of mortally I think she was just mortally disappointed rather than offended. And so she asked me if I could have a look at it. And I said, yeah, of course I can. But, I'm not a book cover designer. I'm a brand consultant. I create brands for a living, and that's what I do. But she said, no, I really trust you. And I said, okay, right, I'll take this then and have a little think about what I would do with this. So for me, this is, for a lot of book covers, it's an exercise in typography and how you can get typography to say something more than just actually the words are, and that kind of creates a little bit of engagement. So I sketched out a page of ideas, but I came up with an idea and I only presented her one idea, which was this really, which is why men win at work. So this notion of these ladders, and where they'd been very literal with their snakes and ladders in the concept, this is sort of a more subtle approach. People will see them. They should see the ladders fairly quickly, but they can make their own decisions whether they're going up and down. They don't need the snakes and stuff like that actually probably just get in the way of it. So that was the concept. I then defined that into maybe we were going to do it bright yellow, and I think this is a really important thing because we were going to do it bright yellow at one point, because I was quite obsessed with men at work signs, kind of road signage and stuff like that. And actually, it was interesting because Jill went, no, it's got to be purple, the colour of Emily Pankhurst and stuff like that, and it's a classic colour. And so we turned it purple, and it worked really, really well. It was really powerful. And I think, to Deb's final point about having your book in your hand, but also being a cornerstone for actually creating presence, without doubt. When Jill got her book out, it was this purple book. When she was going on stages, when she was doing exhibitions, it became such a visual part of. She started wearing more purple. Everything became part of the thing that she was doing, and then it became like a brand to her. And so she was sort of delighted with how all that went. I'm just going to move on to the final bit, and then if there's any questions, I'll answer those. So every week I do a bit of brand untangling, but I also talk about bands, and I always talk about some music that I'm interested in at the moment. And this, I'm going to reach over here to get it. So this is now, I don't know what people's opinions on compilations albums are, but this is an album called Blitz, and it's a compilation album by a DJ called Rusty Egan. Now, have either of you, I can ask directly, and this is not a test, have you heard of Rusty Egan?
No, but I've heard of some of the artists that he is DJing, though. I saw Spandau Ballet and Grace Jones.
Yeah,
and Iggy
Pop, all those sort of bands. So Rusty Egan was a DJ in London, and between 1979 and 1980, or 81, I think, he ran a club called the Blitz Club, which was this nightclub off Oxford Street, which was the foundations for what was post-punk, so after the punk stuff, new wave, and using electronic music. So bands, like you've said, like, early Human League, Tubeway Army, bands like that, Ultravox, Kraftwerk, Iggy Pop, and the electric sounds David Bowie had been doing, and sort of kind of created a whole night, which then led on to what became in the UK, the New Romantic movement with Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, Soft Cell, and all those bands. But they were a little bit after him, most of those. So he'd stopped DJing by about 81, really. But also, interestingly, he was kind of like the pioneering sound. He'd gone off to Germany and Europe to find lots of electronic dance music, and electronic music that you could dance to. And he actually pioneered the term electronic dance music, which we now know as EDM. So I'll send off there's a playlist that I can send you can listen to this. There's loads of cool stuff. There's Roxy Music, Japan, all those great bands, Giorgio Moroder, Yellow, loads of stuff. And what's interesting for me is that like it's all music that I really enjoyed as a kid, but I couldn't have gone to the club because I was 9 years old when this was all happening. So unfortunately, I couldn't go. I couldn't go to the Blitz Club. It closed down. Steve Strange from Visage, he was one of the other people that set at the club, and Boy George was working on the cloakroom store. But then no one knew he was going to be famous. He just hung out and then created Culture Club. So there you go, Rusty Egan, Blitz. It's a sort of new compilation, which should have probably come out many years ago. So they're finally honouring kind of what he achieved there. Anyway. Any more questions from branding to music? I'm more than happy to answer. But if not, thank you very much for coming.
I have a quick question for Jefferson. How did you find out about this? Was it from LinkedIn or somewhere else?
Well, the Blitz...
My wife Sivan was in the call earlier.
Yeah.
And,
cool.
and she's been egging me on to start to. I've been writing essays and kind of memoir entries that I've been kind of working with, and she reads them and she's like, "You just need to write a book." So, so when she saw this, she sent it to me, and I said, "Yeah, I'm definitely going to attend that and listen." And I'm really appreciative of this.
I'm glad that you had. So I think I met Sivan through the Upside. So that's probably how I met
She's
Sivan.
good people, but I'm biased. So
Yeah, yeah. Maybe you don't show Sivan your kind of memo to yourself about your book. You just now need to. It sounds like you just need to crack on with it. But
it is my memo for my book.
she is your memo. Excellent.
Why aren't you writing?
Yeah. Well, we look forward to seeing how it develops. So thanks again for attending. Thanks to everyone who's watching along, who's on the list. And again, thank you, Deborah. We'll put in the links to your worksheets and various bits that can help people get going crafting their books. So thanks again. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
And I'll see you soon.
I have a Rusty Egan compilation I need to listen to.
I massively enjoy it. This is really boring because there is a Rusty Egan. He's done his own version. It's about 12 hours long because he's put everything that he's ever liked. But it's very interesting. I've got a version that I'll drop into the notes, which is actually the vinyl version in the right order of the vinyl. And but you'll find a Rusty Egan thing somewhere. You really enjoy it. So enjoy that. A little bit of electronic dance music for Tuesday evening. Enjoy the rest of the Olympics. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Okay,
Bye, guys.
bye-bye.